You're only operating at half capacity, maybe less, because there's a part of you that you've been suppressing your entire life. A part that's angry, a part that's selfish, a part that's ruthless, a part that wants to dominate, to take, to win at any cost. You've been taught to hide this part, to be ashamed of it, to pretend it doesn't exist. And that suppression is exactly what's keeping you weak. Because the men who actually win, who actually build empires, who actually command respect, they haven't eliminated their darkness, they've integrated it. They've learned to access their aggression strategically. They've weaponized their selfishness into boundaries. They've channeled their ruthlessness into unstoppable drive. This is called shadow integration, and it's the most powerful psychological transformation you can undergo. In the next hour, I'm going to give you the exact 21-day protocol that will teach you how to stop suppressing the parts of yourself you've been taught to hate, how to integrate them consciously, and how to become the kind of man who's not just dangerous when necessary, but completely unstoppable because he has access to his full range of power. But before we go into territory that most men are too scared to explore, you need to subscribe to Rage Refined right now. Hit that button. Turn on all notifications. Because what we're discussing here goes deeper than tactics. This is fundamental psychology. This is the work that separates men who perform well from men who become legendary. Section 1. Understanding your shadow. Let's start with what the shadow actually is. In psychology, your shadow is everything about yourself that you've rejected, denied, or suppressed. It's the parts of your personality that you've been taught are unacceptable. The parts that contradict the image you want to project. The parts you're ashamed of. For most men, the shadow contains aggression, selfishness, sexuality, desire for dominance, capacity for manipulation, greed, vanity, and the raw hunger for power. These aren't comfortable things to acknowledge. Society has taught you that good men don't have these traits, that evolved men have transcended these primitive drives. But here's what they don't tell you. These drives don't disappear when you suppress them. They don't go away because you pretend they're not there. They go underground. They operate unconsciously. And when parts of your personality operate unconsciously, they control you instead of you controlling them. Think about what happens when you suppress aggression. You tell yourself you're peaceful, that you don't get angry, that you're above conflict. But then someone disrespects you and you freeze. You can't access the aggression you need to set boundaries. Or worse, it comes out sideways, in passive-aggressive behavior, in resentment, in sudden explosions you can't control. Or think about suppressing selfishness. You tell yourself you're generous, that you put others first, that you're not greedy, but then you're constantly drained because you can't say no. You're constantly broke because you can't charge what you're worth. You're constantly resentful because you're giving to people who don't reciprocate, or suppressing your desire for dominance. You tell yourself you don't care about status, that you're comfortable with equality, that you don't need to be in control. But then you're constantly in situations where others are making decisions for your life, where you're following instead of leading, where you're powerless and frustrated. This is the cost of shadow suppression. You lose access to the very traits you need to succeed. You become half a man, nice but weak, agreeable but aimless, kind but powerless. And deep down, you know something's missing. You know you're not operating at full capacity. Now here's what shadow integration actually means. It doesn't mean becoming your shadow. It doesn't mean letting your darkness run wild. It means becoming conscious of these rejected parts, accepting that they exist, and learning to access them strategically when needed. An integrated man can access his aggression when boundaries need enforcement, but he's not controlled by it. He can be selfish when his mission requires it, but he's not blind to others. He can dominate when leadership is required, but he's not compulsively dominating everything. He has the full range of human capability available to him, and he chooses consciously which aspects to express in which situations. This is what makes him unstoppable, because he's not handicapped by suppression, he's not constantly fighting parts of himself, He's not pretending to be something he's not. He's fully integrated, fully conscious, fully capable, and that integration gives him power that fragmented men can never access. But integration isn't automatic. It requires deliberate work. It requires facing uncomfortable truths about yourself. It requires admitting that you have capacity for things you've been taught are wrong. And then it requires learning to channel those capacities productively instead of destructively. Section 2, the 21-day protocol. Week 1, recognition. So here's the protocol. 21 days, 3 weeks, 3 phases. Week 1 is recognition. Week 2 is acceptance. Week 3 is integration. And if you follow this exactly, you'll emerge as a fundamentally different person. More powerful, more complete, more dangerous in the best possible way. Week 1 is about recognition. You're going to identify your shadow traits. You're going to make the unconscious conscious. You're going to stop lying to yourself about who you are. Day 1 through 3, you do a brutal inventory. You're going to write down every trait you've denied having, every characteristic you've told yourself you don't possess, every impulse you've been ashamed of, and you're going to be completely honest. Do you ever feel jealous of other men's success? Write it down. Do you ever fantasize about dominance or control? Write it down. Do you ever feel satisfaction when someone who crossed you experiences setback? Write it down. Do you ever manipulate situations to your advantage? Write it down. Do you ever feel greedy, vain, aggressive? Write it all down. This isn't confession. This isn't about judging yourself. This is about seeing yourself clearly, because you can't integrate what you won't acknowledge. Most men lie to themselves constantly about their shadow traits. They maintain a false self-image that feels good but leaves them weak. Day 4 through 7, you're going to track shadow emergence. Throughout these 4 days, you're going to notice when shadow traits appear in your behavior. When you feel aggression rising, when you feel selfish impulses, when you want to manipulate or dominate, when you feel envy or greed. And instead of suppressing these feelings like you normally do, you're going to observe them. You're going to notice what triggers them. You're going to notice what you typically do with them. Do you suppress them? Do you act on them unconsciously? Do you feel ashamed and push them down? You're keeping a journal of these observations. Every time a shadow trait appears, you write down what happened, what you felt, what you did with the feeling, what you wished you could do. This creates awareness. This makes the pattern conscious. Here's what you'll discover during week 1. Your shadow is way more active than you thought. It's influencing your behavior constantly. You just haven't been paying attention. And you'll notice that suppressing it takes enormous energy. Energy that could be used productively if you learn to work with your shadow instead of against it. You'll also notice that your shadow contains power. When you feel aggression, there's energy there. When you feel selfish desire, there's clarity about what you actually want. When you feel the drive to dominate, there's leadership capacity. These aren't just negative traits. They're sources of strength that you've been cutting yourself off from. By the end of week 1, you should have a clear map of your shadow. You know what's in there. You know when it emerges. You know how you've been handling it. And you're ready to move to the next phase. But here's what stops most men in week 1. Shame. They start seeing their shadow traits and they feel terrible about themselves. They think recognizing these parts means they're bad people. So they shut down the process and go back to suppression. Don't do that. Remember, everyone has these traits. Literally everyone. The difference between powerful men and weak men isn't the presence of shadow traits. It's whether they're integrated or suppressed. Powerful men have accepted their shadow. Weak men are still pretending it doesn't exist. Week 2, acceptance. Week 2 is about acceptance. This is where you stop fighting your shadow and start working with it. This is where you give yourself permission to be fully human instead of pretending to be a saint. Day 8 through 10, you practice shadow dialogue. This sounds strange, but it works. You're going to have conversations with your shadow traits. You're going to personify them and talk to them. For example, let's say you've identified that you have suppressed aggression. You're going to imagine your aggression as a separate entity, and you're going to ask it questions. Why are you here? What do you want? What are you trying to protect? What happens when I suppress you? And then you're going to answer from that part of yourself. Your aggression might say, I'm here to protect you. I want you to have boundaries. I'm trying to make sure people don't walk all over you. When you suppress me, you become a doormat and you resent everyone. This creates integration. You're acknowledging that your shadow traits have legitimate purposes. They're not just destructive impulses. They're protective mechanisms that develop for good reasons. And when you understand their purpose, you can work with them instead of against them. You do this with each major shadow trait you identified. Your selfishness, your desire for dominance, your greed, your vanity. Each one has a reason for existing. Each one is trying to meet a legitimate need. And when you understand that, acceptance becomes possible. Day 11 through 14, you practice controlled expression. This is where you start giving your shadow traits small, safe outlets. You're not letting them run wild, but you're also not suppressing them completely. If you have suppressed aggression, you might practice expressing it in a boxing workout. You might practice saying no firmly to requests that drain you. You might practice having difficult conversations where you state your boundaries clearly. If you have suppressed selfishness, you might practice keeping money you'd normally give away. You might practice prioritizing your goals over others' needs for a few days. You might practice saying, I'm focusing on myself right now without apologizing. If you have suppressed dominance, you might practice taking charge in situations where you'd normally defer. You might practice making decisions without seeking approval. You might practice leading instead of following. The key is controlled expression. You're not becoming your shadow. You're giving it appropriate outlets so the pressure releases gradually instead of exploding destructively. You're teaching yourself that these traits can be expressed productively. And here's what happens. You start feeling more powerful, more complete, more authentic, because you're not constantly using energy to suppress parts of yourself. You're not fragmenting your psyche, you're operating as a whole person. You'll also notice that controlled shadow expression actually makes you more effective. When you can access aggression strategically, you set better boundaries. When you can be selfish strategically, you achieve your goals faster. When you can dominate strategically, you lead more effectively. But week 2 requires something difficult. It requires you to challenge your self-image. You've probably built an identity around being nice, being agreeable, being selfless. And now you're acknowledging that you have capacities that contradict that identity. This creates cognitive dissonance. It feels uncomfortable. You might feel like you're becoming a worse person, but actually you're becoming a more honest person. You're becoming a more complete person. You're accepting the full spectrum of human nature instead of pretending half of it doesn't exist. By the end of week 2, you should feel different. Less internal conflict, more access to your full range of emotions and drives, more honest about who you actually are, and ready for the final phase. Week 3, integration. Week 3 is integration. This is where you learn to consciously choose when to express shadow traits and when to choose other aspects of your personality. This is where you become strategically flexible instead of rigidly suppressing or unconsciously expressing. Day 15 through 17, you practice situational selection. You're going to deliberately choose which aspect of yourself to express based on what the situation requires, not based on what's comfortable or what your default pattern is. You're going into a negotiation where you need to be tough. You're consciously accessing your aggression and dominance. You're spending time with someone you care about who needs support. You're consciously choosing empathy and generosity. You're working on your business alone. You're consciously choosing selfish focus on your goals. This is conscious living. Most people are on autopilot. They have one mode and they run it everywhere. The nice guy is nice everywhere. even when it costs him. The aggressive guy is aggressive everywhere, even when it damages relationships. But integrated people have range. They have access to different aspects of themselves, and they choose consciously. Here's how you practice this. Before entering any situation, you ask yourself, what does this situation require? Does it require assertiveness or accommodation? Does it require selfishness or generosity? Does it require dominance or collaboration? And then you consciously access the trait that serves the situation. This feels fake at first, like you're performing, but actually you're being more authentic than ever before. Because authentic doesn't mean expressing your default pattern constantly. Authentic means having conscious access to your full self and choosing appropriate expression. Day 18 through 20, you practice shadow alchemy. This is where you learn to transform shadow energy into productive action. You're taking the raw power of your shadow traits and channeling it into building your empire. Your aggression becomes fuel for intense work sessions. Your selfishness becomes protection of your time and energy. Your desire for dominance becomes leadership drive. Your greed becomes ambition for building wealth. Your vanity becomes commitment to excellence. This is the highest level of shadow integration. You're not just accepting your shadow. You're not just expressing it occasionally. You're transforming it into the very fuel that powers your success. Here's a practical example. You feel envious when you see someone more successful than you. Old pattern, suppress the envy and pretend you're happy for them. New pattern, acknowledge the envy, recognize it as information about what you want, and use the energy as motivation to build what they have. Or you feel aggressive when someone disrespects you. Old pattern, suppress it and act like it's fine. New pattern, acknowledge the aggression, recognize it as signal that boundaries are being crossed, and use the energy to enforce boundaries clearly and firmly. Or you feel selfish desire to keep all your resources for yourself. Old pattern, feel guilty and give away your time and money. New pattern, acknowledge the selfishness, recognize it as protection of your capacity to build, and use it to maintain boundaries around your resources so you can actually achieve your goals. This is alchemy, taking what you were taught was wrong and transforming it into what makes you powerful. Not by becoming your shadow, but by integrating it consciously. Day 21, you do a final assessment. You look back at who you were 3 weeks ago and who you are now. You notice what's changed. You notice what's now accessible that wasn't before. You notice how you feel different. And then you make a commitment. You commit to maintaining this integration, to continuing conscious expression, to never going back to unconscious suppression, because now you know what it feels like to operate at full capacity, and partial operation will never be acceptable again. Section 5, the dark side of integration. Now we need to talk about something important. Shadow integration makes you more powerful, but power without wisdom is dangerous. And there's a real risk that men who do this work will become destructive instead of unstoppable. Here's what happens to some men when they start integrating their shadow. They overcorrect. They were suppressing aggression, so now they're aggressive everywhere. They were suppressing selfishness, so now they're selfish to everyone. They were suppressing dominance, so now they're dominating every situation. This isn't integration, this is shadow possession. This is letting the shadow take over instead of learning to work with it consciously. And it leads to destroyed relationships, burned bridges, and eventual isolation. So you need guardrails. You need principles that guide how you express your integrated shadow. Without these principles, shadow integration can turn you into exactly the kind of person you should be fighting against. First principle, conscious expression, not unconscious reaction. You express shadow traits when you choose to, not when you're triggered. If you're accessing aggression because someone made you angry and you're reacting emotionally, that's not integration, that's being controlled. Integration means you can feel the anger, choose whether to express it, and express it strategically if you do. Second principle, strategic application, not constant deployment. You don't need to be aggressive in every situation just because you've integrated your aggression. You access it when boundaries need enforcement. Otherwise, you choose different aspects of yourself. Integration is about having options, not being stuck in shadow mode. Third principle, building, not destroying. Your shadow energy should be channeled toward building your empire, not tearing others down. Aggression builds discipline. Selfishness protects your resources. Dominance creates leadership. But if you're using these traits just to hurt people or prove superiority, you're misusing the power. Fourth principle, self-awareness over self-righteousness. Just because you've integrated your shadow doesn't mean you're evolved or superior. It means you're honest about your full nature. Stay humble. Stay aware of your capacity for destruction. Never think you're beyond needing to monitor your own behavior. Fifth principle, reciprocity in relationships. Yes, you can be selfish about your mission. Yes, you can be dominant in leadership. But in your close relationships with people who've earned your respect, you need balance. Integration doesn't give you permission to be selfish with everyone. It gives you discernment about when selfishness serves and when it damages. These principles are critical because shadow integration without wisdom creates tyrants. It creates men who are powerful but isolated, men who win but are alone, men who dominate but are eventually overthrown. The goal isn't to become dangerous for the sake of being dangerous. The goal is to become unstoppable in building the life you want. And that requires integrating your shadow while maintaining your principles. Think about the men you actually respect. The men with real power. They have access to their full range of capability. They can be ruthless when necessary. They can be aggressive when required. They can be selfish about their mission. But they're also strategic. They're also principled. They're also capable of loyalty, generosity, and collaboration when appropriate. That's the model, not shadow suppression, not shadow possession, but conscious integration with strategic expression guided by clear principles. Section 6, maintaining integration. Long-term shadow integration isn't a one-time event, it's an ongoing practice because your shadow will continue testing boundaries. It will continue seeking expression, and if you're not conscious, it will start controlling you again, either through suppression or possession. So you need maintenance protocols, daily practices that keep you integrated and conscious. Here's what that looks like practically. First, daily shadow check-ins. Every evening, you spend 5 minutes asking yourself, where did my shadow show up today? Did I express it consciously or react unconsciously? Did I suppress it when I should have expressed it? Did I overexpress it when I should have chosen restraint? This keeps you honest about your patterns. Second, weekly integration review. Once per week, you do a deeper review. You look at the major situations you handled. You assess whether you had appropriate access to your full range of traits. You identify patterns of suppression or possession that are developing. You adjust accordingly. Third, monthly recalibration. Once per month, you revisit your integration principles. You ask, am I using my shadow energy to build or destroy? Am I being strategic or reactive? Am I maintaining balance in close relationships? Am I staying humble or becoming arrogant? This prevents drift. Fourth, find integration partners. You need men in your life who are also doing this work. Men who understand shadow integration, men who can call you out when they see you suppressing or when they see you being possessed. Men who are on the same path and can provide perspective. Most men can't do this. Most men are still suppressing their shadow and will be threatened by your integration. They'll interpret your newfound capacity for aggression as being mean. They'll interpret your selfishness as being selfish in a negative way. They'll misunderstand what you're doing, so you need men who get it. Men who've done the work. Men who can have conversations about shadow integration without judgment or misunderstanding. These relationships are critical for maintaining integration long-term. Fifth, continue channeling shadow energy productively. The more you use your shadow traits to build, the more integrated they become. Aggression becomes discipline. Selfishness becomes boundary maintenance. Dominance becomes leadership. The transformation continues as long as you're actively channeling. But if you stop channeling productively, the shadow starts operating destructively again. It's like water. It needs to flow somewhere. If you direct the flow, it powers your turbines and generates energy. If you don't, it floods randomly and causes destruction. So you need ongoing projects that require your full capacity, businesses to build, goals to achieve, challenges to overcome, things that demand you show up with your full integrated self, shadow included. This keeps the energy moving productively. Sixth, watch for shadow inflation. This is when your shadow starts taking over your identity. When you start thinking of yourself primarily as aggressive, dominant, selfish. When these traits become who you are instead of capacities you have access to. Shadow inflation is subtle. It happens when integration starts feeling good and you over-identify with your shadow. You start thinking the shadow is the real you and everything else is fake. But that's just another form of fragmentation. Integration means you have access to everything, not that you become your shadow. If you notice this happening, you need to consciously practice your other aspects. Spend time in relationships where you express care. Do acts of generosity. Practice collaboration. Remind yourself that you're not your shadow. You're an integrated human with full range. Section 7, the integrated life. So what does life actually look like after integration? How do you operate differently? How does it change your relationships, your business, your entire experience? First, you have emotional stability. You're not constantly fighting yourself. You're not using enormous energy to suppress parts of your personality. You're not having internal conflicts about whether you're allowed to feel what you're feeling. You just feel, acknowledge, and choose consciously how to respond. This creates calm. Integrated men are calm because they're not at war with themselves. They can feel intense emotions without being controlled by them. They can access powerful drives without being possessed by them. They operate from a place of internal peace, even when expressing intensity externally. Second, you have strategic flexibility. You can adapt to any situation because you have access to your full range. Business negotiation requires toughness. You access it. Intimate conversation requires vulnerability. You access it. Leadership situation requires dominance. You access it. You're not locked into one mode. This makes you more effective in every domain. Most men are rigid. They have one way of operating and they try to force it into every situation. Integrated men are fluid. They match their expression to what the situation requires. This makes them succeed where rigid men fail. Third, you have authentic relationships. Because you're not pretending to be something you're not. You're not suppressing your shadow and performing niceness. You're honest about your full nature. And that honesty creates deeper connection with people who can handle it. Yes, some people will leave. The people who are comfortable with your suppressed version won't like your integrated version. Let them go. The people who can handle your full self, shadow included, will form deeper bonds with you than you've ever experienced because they're relating to the real you, not the performance. Fourth, you have unstoppable drive. Because all your energy is aligned. You're not using half your energy to suppress your shadow. You're channeling all of it into building. Your aggression fuels your discipline. Your selfishness protects your focus. Your dominance drives your leadership. Everything serves your mission. This is what makes you unstoppable. Not dangerous in a destructive way. Unstoppable in a building way. You have access to levels of intensity and focus that suppressed men can never reach. You can work harder, longer, more strategically because you're operating at full capacity. Fifth, you have real confidence. Not fake confidence based on pretending you're something you're not. Real confidence based on accepting your full self. You know you have capacity for darkness and you're not afraid of it. You know you have shadow traits and you're not ashamed. This creates unshakable foundation. Integrated men don't get rattled easily because they've already accepted the worst parts of themselves. They've already faced their shadow and made peace with it. So external judgment doesn't penetrate. Criticism doesn't destabilize. Setbacks don't destroy their self-image. They're solid. Sixth, you have purposeful power. You're not powerful for the sake of being powerful. You're powerful in service of building something meaningful. Your integrated shadow gives you the capacity to overcome obstacles, dominate markets, win competitions. But it's all directed toward creating the life and legacy you actually want. This is the difference between destructive power and constructive power. Destructive power just breaks things to prove it can. Constructive power builds empires. And integrated men have access to constructive power because they've learned to channel their shadow toward creation. So you have the complete protocol. 21 days. Week 1, recognition. Week 2, acceptance. Week 3, integration. Daily practices to maintain it. Principles to guide it. Understanding of what life looks like on the other side. And now you decide, are you going to stay fragmented, suppressing half of yourself, operating at partial capacity? Or are you going to do the work, face your shadow, integrate it consciously, and become unstoppable? Most men will stay fragmented because facing your shadow is uncomfortable. Admitting you have dark traits is threatening to your self-image. And learning to express them consciously requires work that never ends. So they'll stay weak, pretending to be good, wondering why powerful men are passing them. But you're different. You're going to start today. Day 1 of recognition begins right now. You're going to spend tonight doing your shadow inventory, writing down every trait you've suppressed, getting honest about your full nature, and then you're following the protocol exactly for 21 days. Subscribe to Rage Refined if you haven't already, because this channel is where men learn to access their full power. Not just the acceptable parts, not just the comfortable parts, all of it. Integrated, conscious, strategic, unstoppable. You just learned the shadow integration protocol. Now go execute it. Face what you've been running from. Accept what you've been denying. Integrate what you've been suppressing. And become the kind of man who's not just dangerous when necessary, but completely unstoppable because he operates at full capacity. 21 days. That's all it takes to fundamentally transform how you operate. To access power you didn't know you had. To become integrated, complete, and absolutely unstoppable. Start today.